Hello friends, welcome back to Stickboy's Lab. I'm Stickboy, and today we are going to be building some shock mounts for the custom shocks that we built in the last episode. We'll be installing new electronics tray, which I'll show you a little bit closer in a bit. So stick around and see what happens. So those of you who have been around the WPL C24, C14, and other varieties are familiar with this stock electronics tray. It works fine for stock electronics, stock vehicles that never have anything done to them. As you can see, I've already cut a few pieces out here and there, and it wasn't really working out for my needs. Now, a few weeks ago, I decided to join the ranks of the cool kids, and I bought a 3D printer. And so, one of the first projects I had is I designed and printed out this electronics tray. It's a little hard to see because it's white and washed out here, but you can see it has inner fenders. There's the hole where the servo arm comes through. There's a hole for the stock switch. So it'll work with the stock electronics, but it should do a little better. And this was my first version. As you can see, I marked it up to make some changes. And I printed out a second version. So you can see here's the second version. It's not entirely how I want it. You can see right here are some shock towers that I made that will fit the custom shocks. They work okay, but I wasn't completely happy with them. I also have a few little devices that I have not put on here yet. One is these little guys, which are designed to go in. I don't know if we can see it here. They're designed to go in here and serve as a body hold down clamp, and they will swivel up over the stock mounts. So then I made a few more modifications to that file, and I printed out yet another version. And this is a little hard to see as well because it's also white. But you can see I added some shock towers that look a little more tubular. Here you can see better the towers I made to nest the stock servo. There's a tower to mount the stock ESC receiver. And there's just a little more room under there. As you can see here, I'm still using the stock servo hold down. It's been modified just a bit. So here's what it looks like with the body pulled off. And so my next step here is I'm going to remove all the electronics. So let's get at removing this one. If you look at this servo hold down, you can see that I cut off the little bosses that hang out here on the original, and that's the only modification that I've made to this servo hold down. The servo just sets in there and comes right out just like that. And there's that electronics tray out. I'm not a big fan of the stock shocks on these, but I'm even less of a fan of many of the aftermarket shocks, especially the way they look. Now, I'm not some crazy, insane scale freak who has to have every particular thing exactly in scale, but a lot of the shocks are just way too massive for my tastes. So I guess maybe I am that freak. So there we have our front shocks off. Everything's just kind of flopping in the breeze there. And the plan is to build some shock mounts right off the top of this axle C. And the shock that I made will sit right up here in this neighborhood and go up to the shock towers on the electronics tray. The plan is to build some lower shock mounts out of some brass shim stock and to glue it in there with some E6000. So that will be our next project. So here's a template I made of what that lower shock mount might look like. I don't know if I can get it into place here gracefully. but it'll sit there something like that. So here I have a piece of 20 thousandths brass shim stock, and this piece right here is just about the right width. I'm going to lay out my paper here and make a mark about where I need that to be. We'll square that up with my not a square. And I'll go cut that out on the bandsaw. So I have two pieces of brass cut out here, one for each side. They are roughly the shape I need them to be. I'll fumble around here a little bit and make some marks on these corners where they can be nipped off. I don't think these are terribly precise, and if they don't fit quite right, we'll take the Dremel to them and make them do what we want. I think I'm just going to nip these corners off here with my side cutter. That was not as easy as it could have been. Maybe I should have grabbed a tin snips or something actually made to do this kind of work. So I did some measurements and made some marks on these pieces with my not so Sharpie. I'm going to try to make some kind of something or other so I can get these bent up fairly even. I'm not sure what that'll look like, but it might look something like a lineman's pliers and a hammer. So I'm going to take this right here and hit it with a hammer and see if I can somehow ruin the whole thing. So there's one bend. My fear has come true. If you look at this, the legs are not the same length, which is pretty typical with doing things that way. So we might have to try again on that side, but I'm going to take this other piece and we'll try again. We might get lucky this time. That appears a little better, if our shock will fit. And it does. And our shock fits in there. I can bend it just a little bit more and it'll be just fine. So here we have these two lower shock mounts. There's that one bent up. I did manage to salvage that other one with a little bit of tweakage. Drilled some holes in there, took the Dremel and cleaned some things up a little bit. And now I'm going to rough these up just a little bit inside, and we'll make an attempt to glue these things in there. So I'm going to take a little bit of the lovely E6000. And we'll goober that up good. Lots and lots of goober. And we'll slide that down in there. We'll let that sit and cure, and we'll come back later. So it seems like our lower shock mounts are all dried up. I'm going to start mocking up this front electronics tray. I'll drop that in there. I think it sits about right there. Let me see if I can clamp this in place. And I'm going to mark my holes here. I'll take that off and drill those out. So I'm just going to cut a couple of pieces of welding wire here for pins to mock these shocks up. We'll clip that off. Put a little bend on the end. I'm going to have to buy some hardware. I don't believe I have any fasteners the right size, but this will work for now to set things in place. So here's a quick mock-up of what things might look like once they're sort of completed. You can see the shock hanging in there. It's looking roughly the right size for this rig. It's probably sitting just a little bit higher than it actually will. I need to adjust that spring just a little bit. Don't have the electronics in here, but you can see the top of the shock's poking through. I'll probably end up painting all that eventually anyways. Now, does the hood shut? It does. So that means we got enough clearance in there. I was a little bit worried about that, but it seems to all work together okay. So here we have all the stock electronics put back in it. Everything seems to fit okay. There's a few minor adjustments that I need to make if I ever print another one of these, but this seems to be working out okay. So here you can see we have our tabs, and these swing over like this to lock the cab in place. There's one there, there's one over there. And we have some fasteners in here. They need to be tightened down. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to make up some limiting. We're going to call them straps, but it's not really straps. What it is just some thread used typically for exterior stuff. It's a waxed black thread, and I'm just going to run those inboard somewhere so that they don't get in the way of the tires and drive shaft and that sort of thing. So that's the plan. So it's probably a little hard to see here, but I have thread right here. I drilled a hole in the back of the shock mount. I also drilled a hole, focus, up here behind the shock into the fender well. Around this side, you can see the thread coming through and a little spring end holding it in. And that's all I did for that. I got lucky, managed to get the length about right. So we'll repeat that on the other side and call it good. We'll open the hood, swing our clips into place. Oh hey, thanks for watching today as we installed the electronics tray and the shock mounts in the front. It was a fun project. I'm happy it turned out the way that it did. I'll put a link in the description for the files for the electronics tray on Thingiverse if you want to download those and try to make one for yourself. There may be a little bit of adjustments you need to make for your particular application, but I'm real happy with it for my needs. So thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and as always, play nice.